What's happening, everybody? It's me, Robert Phoenix, your Astro Weatherman, checking in at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time here in Texas. And I would say not so sunny Texas. It was fairly overcast yesterday during the eclipse, and I decided that I didn't want to do a live stream yesterday. I just kind of wanted to take it in. And for me, taking it in was my backyard. And it was one of the eeriest motherfucking things I'd ever experienced. It was incredibly eerie. And so what I did is I have about 2 minutes of video that is at totality. And there's only a very small glimpse of the sun in the video because it was mostly obscured by clouds here. And yet the effect of the eclipse was for me was overwhelming. It was so uh, profound. Dark is the word that I would use. Like I'd never experienced anything like that before, where the day literally turned to night. And so I was shooting the footage of the eclipse through the top of my trees in the backyard, and you could just watch the sky get dimmer and so it starts off with these branches. And you can see the light through the branches and the leaves, and then all of a sudden there's less light, and it was just like the sky was completely blacked out, and all you can see were just little tiny uh, sort of rays of light through the leaves. It was very dark, and I have a slight image of the sun towards the end as it's moving out of the eclipse phase. You can see the brightness of the sun return, and it was it was freaky. It was really freaky, and not only was the sky just completely dark, but the sounds, before the eclipse. And I also recorded sound before the eclipse. I've got about maybe about a 12-minute recording before totality. It's just sound. I just wanted sound. I didn't want anything from the sky or anything. And you can hear what's going on. There's wind. I have chimes in the backyard. You can hear the chimes. So there's birds singing. There's people that you can hear in the area who are buzzing around because of the eclipse. And then as we got closer to totality, everything stopped. The people didn't stop, 'cause I have some kids that live next door. So they were very excited that this was happening in their lifetime. And so you could hear them, but the wind completely stopped. The birds completely stopped. There was this eerie stillness during totality. And it was my experience was I was in the midst of something very profound, and I could feel the dread of the ancients and what that must have felt like to them. People that were, I don't know if they were uninformed. They may have been more informed than we were with certain things. I think in a lot of ways we're less informed than the ancients were, but nonetheless, almost every single culture has a a dim view or a dark view of the eclipse and what it meant to them in terms of their experience. And they often would talk of, we spoke about this before, they would often talk of a great dragon consuming the sky. And whether it was an eclipse or a comet, both of which were these celestial occurrences that were considered to be ill omens, that they would at times make great amounts of noise in order to chase the dragon away from their city or their town or their land. And I suppose it would be somewhat of a feeling of being victorious for when the event would end. and it would have given them a sense of power. Like, well, if we make enough noise, the darkness will disperse. And wouldn't it be nice if we made enough noise in our time, and the darkness of our time would be dispersed? Unfortunately, that does not necessarily seem to be the case, because as much noise as we make, it certainly seems like the darkness only encroaches closer and closer. But that's okay. At least we're seeing it. We're seeing it for what it is, and the rest is in the hands of a greater power than we can attach ourselves to, or at least in terms of the outcome. So let's talk about what happens next. Oh, before I get into what happens next, there was a very strange phenomena that occurred here in Texas, where I live, Kerrville, which was on CNN. It was the most famous place during the eclipse. Right, all the networks came here to show Eclipse Central, and after the eclipse, myself and one of the Chatarians came by who was in the area viewing the eclipse. One of the Chatarians came by to say hi. So I took said Chatarian out to lunch at one of our riverfront restaurants here in Kerrville, and the view in many cases is much better than the food in these restaurants. I'm just being honest here. So we were there and having some food on the deck, and there were these two helicopters, and they just kept buzzing the Guadalupe River back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I'm asking myself, what the fuck are these helicopters doing? Why are they doing this? Why are they flying so low over this river? Are they just getting their kicks? I paranoid me thinks that they've got some kind of bug spray that they're releasing onto the river. The rest of us who were trying to take in this post-eclipse day. That was just a notice on my part. It was very odd. And then later in the day, now I don't know if any of you experienced this, but later in the day, I was exhausted. It was like energetically, I was asleep by 8 o'clock, which is really unusual for me. And when I say asleep, it didn't mean I was in bed. I was on my couch watching Jason Whitlock go on and on and on about Dawn Staley. And I guess that helped put me to sleep. But I felt just drained energetically after the whole thing. So now the question is, what happens next? Because really, for me, it's all about the aftermath. And we have, theoretically, some people will say it's a week and a half on either side of the eclipse, which is basically a 3-week window. And some people say it's a 3.5 week on the other side of the eclipse, which makes it basically what's that, 6 weeks, 7-week window, right? Almost 2 months, right? So if the latter applies, we're in a 3.5 week post-eclipse window where you should pay attention to the phenomenon that occurs, takes place. Okay, so we're not done, right? It's not like, oh well, that's over now. No, not quite. If we go back in time and we look at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020, people said, well, that happened. Well, yes and no. I mean, it happened, but the effects of the happening had not been felt. The effects of the happening would be felt later on, and ultimately to its conclusion on March 13th, which would be a little over 2 months from the fact. But if you look at the first case of COVID, which took place in this country, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of February, so it would have been a little over a month from that point in time. So we're not done with the eclipse effect at all. And we're also staring down this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is coming, and also Mars-Saturn in Pisces. So there's still a lot going on astrologically. And again, according to, depending on what model you follow, we are in a post-eclipse window, which is either a week and a half or 3.5 weeks long. So let's be generous and let's go 3.5 weeks, and then we'll keep our radar attuned to what takes place. So pay attention, pay attention, pay attention to what happens next. All right, let's get into the weather so we can get caught up here. Okay, and there we go. We got the right day, we got the right year, we got the right time, we got the right city. The coordinates are correct, and they're in. So it's basically the same thing as the eclipse, with the exception of the moon, which is now moved into Capricorn. I'm sorry, Taurus at 1 degree, and coming in and squaring Pluto today. So this is a pretty intense square. I mean, let's be honest here. So we're still in the new moon phase, sans the eclipse, but in the post-eclipse aftermath. And again, we're still in this zone, and especially with Jupiter and Uranus here, we're still in the zone where we're dealing with the fundamental issues of Taurus, which are assets, your home, your money, your bank account, your safety and security. There is no sign that defines any of those more precisely than the sign of Taurus, with maybe the exception of Cancer. But with Cancer, we get the emotional connection to those physical things. These are the direct physical manifestation of those things. So we are looking at today, right, a threat, a fundamental threat to safety and security. It's just the way it plays out. We have Pluto in Aquarius, and again, Aquarius being the group, the collective, the team, right? It's all very Aquarian. And what's interesting is tonight I think we're going to do a serious sports with Al Dog, and I know that we'll go over the national championship game, but there's another story that's brewing that's possibly even bigger than the national championship game, and that is that the Charlotte Hornets are going to interview a coach who is coaching for the Sacramento Kings G League team, and the coach happens to be a woman. So here we go with the moon in Taurus, which is the feminine, squaring up against Pluto, which is the intensity of things that we hold, right? That's what Pluto is. It's the gravitron of the things that we hold. And we have this discussion. It's the first discussion of a female coach to be interviewed for a head coaching position. I would not be surprised if she gets the position. And because number one, we'll talk more about this on Serious Sports. Number one, the amount of publicity that a team like the Charlotte Hornets would derive from hiring a female coach would be tremendous. And I'm not using that word as a superlative in terms of the impact that this person would have. I don't know if they're a good coach or not. They must be decent enough, I suppose, to be able to coach a G League team, although clearly there's enough social pressure and reward for that to happen. But if you're the Charlotte Hornets and your team has sucked for who knows how long, even though Michael Jordan had been the presumptive owner for a long period of time, it doesn't matter. You're going to get a lot of publicity from hiring a female coach. So here we go. She's going to be hired today, or not hired, interviewed. And we have this moon Pluto square. So it's going to elicit some very strong feelings from people, and on both sides. And there are going to be people that'll well, we need more female coaches in men's sports. And you'll get purists, and you'll get people saying, well, no, we don't. And it'll be interesting from a sociological standpoint, because if you go into things like blackmail blackmail YouTube, right, or blackmail Twitter, and I'm not talking about the crime, I'm talking about the entities that create the content. One of the greatest uh, villains or sources of social disorder is the white liberal female. And so there's going to be no doubt uh, a lot of finger pointing, j'accuse, towards the system for putting a white. And again, I don't know what this person's politics are. They could be a Trump voter, but somehow I doubt that they are. That this would be another manifestation of the white liberal uh, political persona in the guise of a female that will theoretically guide the lives of young black men. And so it's going to be very interesting. And I guarantee you're going to hear about this. And I see this as this Moon Pluto square. And again, from I guess if you feel okay enough about your manhood, that it's not a big deal. Oh, it's not a big deal. I'm man enough. Our sports can handle integration. But on the other hand, if you're somebody that's paying attention to the social order, or the evolving or de-evolving version of the social order, you will step back and say, well, it could be very problematic. So keep an eye on that as an emerging story. But again, I think the bigger story is insecurity. Today, the insecurity of the system is high. I would not be surprised if we get some banking news that is not all that favorable. And kind of the setup here for the coming conjunction with Jupiter Uranus, and that's going to happen fairly soon. We'll spend more time tomorrow, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow as we get closer. We still are in this alignment with the eclipse planets for the most part, again, with the exception of the moon. We have this Mercury Pluto square, and it's going to get more intense. Oh, look who's here. Look who's here. It's the J Man. It's the J Man. What's going on? My Astro co-anchor. My co-anchor weather cat. Yeah, what's going on, buddy? Much like that eclipse yesterday. He was watching it. You were in the sunroom. You were on your favorite cushion in the sunroom. Yes, you were. Um, I feel like this Mercury Pluto square, the closer that it gets to Taurus, the worse the news is. The worse the economic news is. And again, the reason why I'm talking about it in these terms is because when we have these two squares, which are these dissonant angles in the chart, they tend to stand out more, right? When there's more noise in the sky and more noise in the chart, it tends to sort of disperse, like the the tension, right? It disperses the tension. There's this going on, 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 right? And I think when you have that, you have a kind of a diffusing of the dynamics that are happening. But when you have simple squares, they tend to stand out and they have more prominence. So that's why this is, to me, alarming. Now Mercury's retrograde, so we're it's not going to move forward, and then eventually, will eventually hit Pluto, but it's actually more in the reverse mode, and then when it moves forward, eventually it will square Pluto. So the timing of the square with Mercury and Pluto is probably about, what about about 3 weeks out because we have to go retrograde and direct again. So we'll keep an eye in about 3 weeks. We just want to look at Mercury coming into square Pluto when it does happen. So for now, we have the moon, and we're dealing with emotional, I would say, emotional instability as it relates to financial security and impending threat. Okay. And again, I'm looking at this from a larger picture, but it trickles down because we're at a point now where these things are impacting our lives, and people are asking themselves, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? I was watching a clip from Jimmy Dore last week, and they were talking about these indices in the banking industry, and it has to do with the prime and uh, who is getting loans from the Fed, because if you're getting loans from the Fed, that means that your bank is in trouble. And I think they passed a law, and the law was that for a long time, if you were having trouble with your bank, I think this is all pre-COVID, by the way, that your bank was having trouble financially, that it could borrow money from another bank. And this is how banks did their business. It's like, oh, this bank needs money. Okay, well, we'll lend them the money, but we'll lend them the money with an interest attached to it, right? So this is how banks did business with each other and made money off of each other. Well, the Fed comes along and says, well, we want to change that. If you need money and you're in trouble, you need to come to us. We're going to be the crack dealer for the money problem or the money supply. So that changed, and now banks go to the Fed to borrow money, right? And so when that happens, theoretically, there should be a list of banks that are reporting that they are borrowing from the Fed. And this report came out. They didn't name the banks, but there are at least 9 banks now that are heavily invested in borrowing from the Fed, which means that they're putting these banks at risk. And when banks are at risk, there tends to be a bit of a ripple effect with the banks. So this can be very, very problematic. And I think this is some of the information. And what do you do? What do you do with your money? What do you do with your assets? If the banks who are borrowing from the Fed are not revealed, do you know that if it's your bank or not? You don't know, right? And it could be a regional bank, and apparently some of them are, or it could be a too big to fail bank, and apparently some of them are as well. So do you leave your money in the bank? Do you invest your money in silver? Do you have cash? And then what happens after that? I mean, what happens after a collapse? And I think we've all been a bit on pins and needles here for a very long time, wondering when we're going to have a black swan event. And I would say that if we're going to have a black swan event, that it would be somewhere here with the Jupiter Uranus conjunction, which affects the money supply and assets, hard assets, and also with Uranus, we're dealing with electric assets like crypto. Crypto's an electric asset. So there are plenty of signs in the sky that we are headed towards something of significance financially. I think in 10 days, when the sun moves into Taurus, and by that time, Mercury will begin to start its path back towards being direct again, and we get that Sun-Pluto square, I think we'll have a lot more information on the table, but there's a time when there's enough information on the table, and will it be too late for you to somehow secure your assets and make sure? But again, what happens afterwards, that's a whole different story, and that plunges us into a very different chapter. So, I think the bigger question is, will this current administration risk a financial calamity and or collapse prior to the election? I think that's the big question. Or will they stave off any of the economic strife or economic challenge until after so-called election or whatever occurs in November? So we're in a critical phase right now. And a lot of it depends on which way they want to move the needle. So I would say that it's always good to be able to cover your assets. And, there are various ways to do it. If you've been following this channel and a number of other channels, because many of you are astute and aware, you would be looking at a combination of many different things in order to make sure that you could sustain a somewhat prolonged period of instability. But if we're in year 1, year 2, year 3 of instability, I just, it's going to get very difficult for people. And no matter what actions you take, unless you have some kind of a fortress somewhere where you could ride out a 3-year cycle of instability, it's going to be a handful, right? So I think you do what you can in order to protect what you have to the best of your ability. And then, as the Sufis said, tether your camel first and then trust in God. We have the Mars-Saturn conjunction getting ever closer. So by tomorrow, we'll be talking about Cazimi, where the two of them join forces and create kind of this superstructure. And I think, again, this has the potential being sort of religiously fascistic in some ways, right? That this is order. And this is an imposed order. Now, for you as an individual, I would say that the best thing you can do is to be your own priest or your own priestess, however you want to slice and dice that, and to make sure that you have sovereign reign over your own spiritual practice, right, and your own spiritual worldview. I think that's essential, especially when we're living during a time where others want to superimpose their beliefs onto ours. And we're going into, whenever we deal with Pisces, it's not like we're just dealing with Christianity. There are 3 Abrahamic faiths that theoretically arise, out of the Fertile Crescent, the Middle East, and one of them, of course, is Judaism. So I think we could have a discussion about that as well. And I just read today where some countries are banning the publishing of the or the performance and or the publishing of the book Merchant of Venice or the play Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare, which of course has a character that does not paint a kind picture upon that particular race, and that character is known as Shylock, who is a money lender, and he wants a pound of flesh for his loan. And of course, the pound of flesh is the man's sexual genitalia. That is the pound of flesh. Anyway, so we're seeing kind of this overarching and overbearing energy when it comes to religion and faith. And remember, there's more than just one faith in the world. It's not just Christianity. And the 3 Abrahamic faiths do arise from the theoretical same place. Venus has moved into Aries. It's hot, right? We got a hot Venus and a sextile to Pluto, which means that there's a high degree of attraction in the air today. So it would not be surprising if you're in a grocery store and you get some very interested or interesting looks from people, right? Like, the smile of a stranger or the look of a stranger, right? Sort of, open the packet, add the water, and you get instant chemistry. There's your Venus Pluto sextile. Also, again, if we're dealing with assets, right? And Venus has a lot to do with assets as well. And in Aries, things move quickly. So if you have a plan, don't sleep on your plan. Make your plan happen. I guess the last thing we want to talk about is the sextile with Mars and Jupiter, which is, again, very quick. And again, it's kind of a mirror of what we were talking about because Venus here is in the sign of Aries. Aries is the ruler of Mars. And if you have an instinct to protect, which would be Saturn, right, to protect your assets, we have that sextile to Jupiter and coming in with a sextile to Uranus, and you want to act quickly. Do not hesitate. Do not hesitate. Do not overthink. Move on your instincts and do your best to protect what you own. Okay, let's get into our True Hemp Science Star of the Day. And our True Hemp Science Star of the Day is rather unusual, but of course, every now and then we do dip into the unusual when it comes to our subject matter here. And let's see, here we go. There's our little banner. And of course, True Hemp Science is your one-stop shop for all things hemp related, CBD related. Our guy Chris over at True Hemp Science takes the best organically sourced hemp and turns it into some of the finest CBD products you can find on the internet. And all you got to do is go to their website, buy $100 or more, and you will get a free goodie bag with your order. And the goodie bag is something that you will look forward to. I guarantee it. $150 or more gets you free shipping. There's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. And if you want to find out which product is best for you, just go to truehempscience.com and make an appointment, and Chris will help you out. Okay, here is your True Hemp Science Star of the Day. It is Valerie Solanas. And you may ask yourself, who the fuck is Valerie Solanas? Some of you may know. Valerie Solanas made headlines back in the day when she shot Andy Warhol. And there was a movie actually made about her. And the movie was called I Shot Andy Warhol. And it's about Valerie Solanas. And Solanas was a lit major who had a very brutal upbringing and had been molested by her father and her grandfather. So she was not doing real well from the jump. And if you look at her chart, she has Saturn here in the 12th house, which is the father. And eventually she will wind up in an institution for shooting Andy Warhol. And then, of course, Saturn is opposing Neptune here. So she's got a big T square. Jupiter's going to make all of that bigger. She also has a Sun-Pluto square. So the father is Saturn and the Sun. And both of them are fairly ill-disposed in the chart, meaning that the angularity is very challenging, particularly the Sun-Pluto square, which is very intense and I would say almost borderline murderous. And we also have a Mars-Pluto square, which falls into the same category. And Solanas is a double Aries, and she has Mercury conjunct her Sun, and of course she uses a handgun to go to the factory and shoot Andy Warhol. Now, why did she shoot Andy Warhol? This is a very important part of the story. So Valerie Solanas had written a play about her life, and it's a play that involves a woman who is a hustler, basically her life story. She's sexually abused, has to go to New York City, and in order to go to New York City, she turns herself into a panhandler and a prostitute. Now, Valerie Solanas happens to be a lesbian. She does not like men. In fact, she hates men, which we'll get into in a minute. And so in order for her to survive, she literally has to fuck the thing she hates. which is weird, right? Like it sets up a whole dynamic because that's who's going to pay for her services as a prostitute. And she writes a play about this. So she goes to Andy Warhol and delivers the play, the manuscript for the play. And Warhol looks at it and says, "Well, it's typed really well." And Solanas thought that that was a bit of a snub. And there was a rumor that Warhol offered her a job as a typist at the factory because of her typing skills, but then paid her $25 to be in one of his shitty movies called I, comma Man. I, comma Man. So she's in that movie, and then she was an extra in another movie. And then she apparently meets up with a literary agent who she believes is conspiring to steal her play. And he's in cahoots with Warhol, and Warhol doesn't produce her play. So she becomes very angry at Andy Warhol. She's at this point in time more like the paranoid schizophrenic, a split personality, and she decides to take her vengeance out on Andy Warhol because she feels like her play is being stolen from her, and she shoots him. And it makes a lot of news, right? Andy Warhol eventually recovers, but clearly he is a bit different after this whole thing happens, right? And the reason I'm bringing it up here is because we think of Aries as guns and violence. And this is a violent person. She's a violent person, and the other thing is that she hates men. So even though Warhol was gay, he was still a man, and she hates men. So Valerie Solanas writes a manifesto, and this is ultimately what she becomes famous for. And the manifesto is called Scum, SCUM. And I forget what it stands for, but it's a manifesto about the elimination of all men because her life had been fucked up by her Saturnian grandfather, right? And her father, all in her 12th house. And we have the Sun Pluto square, the Mars Pluto square. Pluto is in the home. Violation. I believe her. I believe she was fucked and fucked over by these men. So what does she do? She writes this manifesto, and the manifesto is about the elimination of all men. And here's the kicker. This is the kicker, is that part of her paradigm is that to replace men, we need automation because something is going to have to do the things that men used to do. So automation is a part of her manifesto. So in this regard, she's also a futurist, which is kind of weird. But if you look around, right, if you look around, is her manifesto the writings of a sexually violated and severely damaged person who is taking it out on the people that damaged her, or was it a roadmap for the future? Because one could make a case that this is where we are headed, right? I mean, if we look around and we see things like what do you call it? The phthalates, all the chemicals that are in plastics, right? The Alex Jones frogs turning gay, right? If you look at that type of chemical intrusion into our ecosystem, one could make a case that it results in a chemical castration of men because it reduces the testosterone and raises, as a result, the estrogen in men. It's a very interesting concept to wrap your head around, right? So is that a long-term goal or plan or byproduct of plastics and these phthalates in our environment to essentially remove men, if not physically, then psychologically and emotionally. And then we look around and we see things like the rule changes in football and all the things that are going along with it. And it just keeps pointing more and more towards some either physical or symbolic removal of men in our society. Look at who's dispensing justice in most of the cities across America. It's generally not men. So was Solanas somebody who was deeply wounded and aggrieved, or in some ways, was she kind of a mad prophetess? And the automation part is quite interesting because I think we could make a case that we are headed towards greater and greater automation. Right? When they say build back better, that's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about building back better in terms of placing all the structures that we have and the structures that need experienced humans to run those structures. Well, in the future, those experienced humans won't be around anymore. So who or what is going to run the structures? It is going to be automation. And in order to do that, you have to absolutely tear down the existing fabric and infrastructure of our society and build everything back, which is going to be, I would say, 90% automated. So this was the vision that Solanas had for her manifesto. And in a strange way, it seems to be coming true or more real than the sadistic fantasy that she was able to scribble out as a play. By the way, not as a play, as a manifesto. By the way, Andy Warhol had said that even her play made him blanch. So there were portions of her play that were so pornographic, it made even Warhol turn red, right? So that gives you some insight into the character of Solanas, the moon in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio, if it is grudge related, forget it, right? And she has this in conjunct with the sun. She is not going to forget, right? She's not going to forget who fucked her over. It's always the program running in the background of her brain, right? Always the program. Now, I would say, had she lived and stayed in a relatively calm space or relatively neutral space, she would have been a prolific writer. She's got Mercury trine Jupiter in Sagittarius in the ninth house. Jupiter, very strident. And she had a desire and a goal to be somebody big, right? With the true node conjuncting her midheaven, but she's reaching for the top. And she's moving away from her deeply wounded psychic roots in the fourth house, going to New York, going to hit the big time. She's originally from New Jersey, right there, right? Crossing the river, going to the big time. But a very damaged person. And again, Chiron in Gemini, that's where you get into split personalities. And even that Chiron Neptune square, bit of mental illness as well. Quite the package there. Valerie Solanas, your True Hemp Science star of the day. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to do a 15 minutes today because I'm having some issues accessing Boxcast, which is clearly a Mercury retrograde issue. But I'll be back tomorrow on Boxcast, and because I'll be able to. I don't know why they're not letting me in. It's just a Mercury retrograde thing. But we'll be back tomorrow over on Boxcast, and then we'll do Thursday on Boxcast as well. I will not be doing a Friday show this week due to family business. So we'll have two shows over on Boxcast tomorrow with 15. And then tonight here on the 11th house, we'll have serious sports with my guy, Al Dog. We'll talk about Caitlin Clark, the astrological implications of Caitlin Clark. We'll talk about this woman, her name is Lindsay, I forget her last name, who is applying or is going to be interviewed for the head coaching job for the Charlotte Hornets, and a bunch of other stuff that will be serious sports related. So please join us right here at 6 p.m. over on the 11th house. Everybody else, thank you very much for being here. Have a blessed day. Mods, thank you for your help. Of course, if you feel like you want to hit the like for the show, that's always helpful, hitting the like. And if you also would like to buy me a cup of coffee, link is in there in the show notes. And mods, thank you very much for doing what you do here every day. And that's it. Love everybody. And I hope that your post-eclipse life is a brilliant one. We'll be back tomorrow here, tonight over on Sirius. Bye for now.